Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Susan Stanton from Afterschool for Children and Teens Now, or ACT Now. We're going to be getting started in just a minute here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. If you have any questions or technical difficulties throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those into the questions box, and we'll be getting started very soon. Good morning again, everybody. This is Susan Stanton from Afterschool for Children and Teens Now, or ACT Now. Thank you again for joining us this morning. We're really excited to dive deeper into this topic with everybody. Just another quick reminder, for those of you who aren't super familiar with GoToWebinar, if you have any questions or if you have any technical difficulties throughout the broadcast, please feel free to type those into the questions box. For those of you who might be more used to using Zoom, there isn't a live chat box like there are in some Zoom meetings. So feel free to put any thoughts or questions into that questions box, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Just before we get started, just kind of like a quick note, today's presentation is going to be focused on digging into the design of virtual engagement. And one of the reasons we decided to dive into this topic in partnership with some of our colleagues is that ACT Now has been doing a lot of these virtual presentations. And so we're hoping that some of our lessons learned and resources that we've found might be helpful for you all. And so as we go along today, we're going to try to model too and point out some of these best practices that we've learned that are important to keep in mind when doing a virtual presentation. And so one of the things I just want to point out at the get-go is that when you're starting a presentation like this, it's really good to orient folks to whatever platform you're using and to let them know how to communicate with you, just as we kind of did right there. Some people might be using Zoom all day. Some people might be using Google Hangouts all day. So just really important to kind of point out those things as you get started. And so now we're going to jump into it and introduce some of the folks we have on the call today. Emma, you want to go to the next slide? Perfect. Oh, I see. Okay. Do our friends from OSEP want to introduce themselves first?
Yes, thank you, Susan. My name is Kristen Perkins. I am staff with the Office of Community Education Partnerships at Northwestern University. I want to welcome everyone on behalf of our OSEP team. Our team has been working through My Shy, My Future to facilitate convening and connecting community-based organizations working in Chicago with youth, family, and communities. Our goal with this work is to elevate and amplify amazing organizations like Act Now, so that they can share their learning process and best practices as we all learn together from each other and build a community of support as we're all doing this work. I'm joined by my colleague, Jen Richards, professor in the School of Education and Social Policy. And both Jen and I are so excited to be a part of this and listen and learn from Susan and Emma as they share their years of experience and lessons learned about virtual engagement. So with that said, and just our welcome, Jen and I are going to fade to the background and let Susan and Emma really take the spotlight and talk about their work.
Thank you so much, Kristen. As I mentioned, my name is Susan Stanton. I'm the network lead for the Afterschool for Children and Teens Now Coalition, or ACT Now. We are a statewide organization that advocates for quality and affordable after-school programs and youth development programs. And so we do that through our advocacy work and our policy work, but also in creating high-quality professional development and quality improvement resources. So you can find lots more information about that on our website, actnowillinois.org. We also encourage you to look at our weekly newsletter that comes out that has great resources such as the ones you'll see today and policy updates. And you can find that by hitting the Join Us link on our website as well. As network lead, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations at ACT Now, and I also take the lead in a lot of our convenings as well as in our policy and community schools work. And Emma, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Susan, Jen, and Kristen. My name is Emma Spencer. I am the Youth Development Associate for ACT Now, or Afterschool for Children and Teens Now Coalition. I primarily spearhead the development of ACT Now's communication materials. I engage with network stakeholders and new members. This is typically through emails and phone calls and meetings, and I also support the organization's policy and advocacy work. I run our social media platforms, which Susan touched upon a bit earlier. This includes our ACT Now website, our Facebook page, and Twitter account.
Great, thanks so much, Emma. So for today, our learning goals are focused on helping you identify factors in choosing different online platforms and helping you decide which ones you want to use, and you might decide to use different platforms for different purposes. We're going to help you brainstorm how to foster engaging digital content. You know, it's really hard. I know when I used to be a classroom teacher and I wanted to engage my students, I could be lively in class and jump around and be active, and we know that that's harder now that we're doing this all digitally, and so we're going to share some resources for that. And then we're also going to help you determine how to analyze the effectiveness of your digital engagement and just some different analytics and data you can look at to see how you're doing. Next slide. Oh, go back one more slide, please. Sorry. So before we dive into some of that, polls don't seem to be uploaded. We were going to do some polls, but we're going to give a second to that to see if I can add some of those in. But really quickly, we'll go to the next slide. Sorry about that, Emma. Give me 1 second. So the first platform we want to talk about here is Zoom/WebEx and what we use those for. So we tend to use these platforms if we are working with groups of 25 people or less, and they're really great for getting face-to-face contact. So WebEx has free and paid subscriptions when you're thinking about cost. Zoom is free for educators or if you're doing shorter meetings. So things to think about with that. And I know that some of you might be preferential or using one platform over the other. So for WebEx meetings, some pros to using those is that it's overall a fairly low cost. WebEx subscriptions are pretty low cost. And then it's really easy to use WebEx as either just a conference call service or to do video or share your screen. Some cons with WebEx is that I know since lots of folks have been using it during quarantine and social distancing time, is that we've seen a lot of issues with it getting frozen out or crashing, and sometimes poor video quality when you're using the video piece. And so we actually used to use WebEx and transitioned away from it because of some of those cons. But again, we think it's a good source to use when you have those smaller meetings. Another thing to be careful of when using WebEx or Zoom is if people are not muted when they enter, or it can unmute themselves, that could be sometimes an issue in platforms like these. For Zoom, some of the things we like about it is that they have these built-in polling options, breakouts. One of my new favorite pieces of Zoom to use is the annotate feature. So that's where other folks can either draw on the screen or add other words or things like that. So if you're meeting with a smaller group, that can be really helpful. I know sometimes in our in-person meetings, we really like to rely heavily on using charts and using poster paper to kind of help brainstorm ideas. And so the annotate feature in Zoom helps to kind of replace that. And then also definitely really appreciate getting to see folks face to face. Some of the downsides to using things like Zoom are sometimes price can be an issue if you don't qualify for one of those free subscriptions. And then we also know the big downside to Zoom that we've seen over the past few months is security. I think a lot of folks have heard about things like Zoom bombing, folks joining Zoom meetings if they aren't password protected, or folks, unmuting themselves or typing in things they shouldn't be, or things of that nature. And so that can definitely be a downside, especially when you're getting to the larger side of your meetings when it comes to Zoom. And just a note, we will also be sharing the PowerPoint after the presentation. So one of the other tools that we like to use for our larger groups is GoToWebinar. So this is definitely something that we use. If we have about over 50 people for sure in a presentation setting, we're always using GoToWebinar. It has a meeting option, so you could use GoToMeeting instead of GoToWebinar for smaller groups. We actually think that for smaller groups, Zoom is better because it promotes better discussion. It's a little bit more interactive. I don't love GoToMeeting for those smaller groups. So we mostly use GoToWebinar for larger groups. It's great for large meetings. It's great for presentations where there's more limited audience engagement. So for example, with Zoom, people are unmuting themselves, or you might be able to see people, or there's a live chat box. We don't have those things with GoToWebinar. So definitely a little bit more limited audience engagement. But some of the things we like about GoToWebinar is that you can do built-in evaluations. So at the end, as soon as people log out, it'll pop up an evaluation, or you could do it as a quiz. We've done that before for training for people to answer questions right away. You can do polls throughout the presentation, and there's a question feature built in, so you can try to keep some of that interactiveness. One of the other fun features we really like in GoToWebinar is that in the dashboard, organizers can look at the attentiveness of folks. So I can see right now individually and overall in the group who has GoToWebinar up on their screen and who might be checking email and things of that nature. You can also really see how effective you're being in your presentation that way. And then finally, with GoToWebinar, all of your recordings get put into a recording library. And then depending on your subscription level, you can have your own GoToWebinar channel too, with all of your past recordings there as well and available. This subscription does cost. I will say that there were definitely years where ActNow did not have a GoToWebinar subscription. And ways we got around that is that sometimes when we needed it, we would our webinars would be hosted by another organization. So sometimes the State Board of Education would host our webinars for us, or the United Way would host our webinars, and they would let us use their subscription. Outside of that, there are free trials, and I will say, with no shame, that there were also years where I was going through multiple emails of different staff members to use the free trial to be able to have our webinars. Just keep in mind that when your free trial expires, you're not going to necessarily have that channel or recording library. You'll still have access to your recordings, but you're not going to have that kind of set place in dashboard with them. So another resource we know that lots of you are using is Google Hangout. Again, this is a free source. Sometimes people might be using Google Meet instead of Google Hangout. We know that this is what's being required to use by CPS. So we definitely think it's important to mention. Google Hangout's great because there's a lot, it's easy to have a lot of cameras going at once. You can also integrate it with other Google applications. Like if you have colleagues who are using Google Calendar or things of that nature, you can put the Google Hangout invite right in the calendar and things of that nature. Some other important things to keep in mind with Google Hangouts, I've found that the Google Hangout camera lens, or what they're showing from your camera, is a really wide angle. And so keep that in mind, that sometimes what can be seen on your camera in Zoom is more limited than what can be seen on your camera for Google Hangouts. So when I'm doing Google Hangouts, I'm always making sure everything's put away in my background, because I know that it's going to be seen more. Also with Google Hangouts, another drawback we see is that even though you can change the views of what cameras you're seeing, the view of yourself isn't always as strong. So if there was something going on in your background, you might not be able to see it looking at your screen as easily as other folks might be able to see it, because you're going to be a little bit smaller. There's not as many of those outside features in Google Hangout as we see in Zoom and in GoTo, being a free subscription. But, and I'll share this in a minute in the chat box, there are certainly lots of outside applications that you can bring into Google Hangouts to make them more engaging as well, if you want to do quizzes or polls with students or things of that nature. Next slide. And Emma, is this one that you want me to keep tackling, or is this something that you want to share a little bit on?
Would you mind continuing, and then I'll pick up when we go over graphics and analytics?
Yeah, sure, sounds good. I just didn't want to step on you. So another big tool for presentations that we've seen a lot of programs using is social media. So both, especially Facebook and Instagram. I know a lot of programs, especially those who are working with teens, are using Snapchat. I don't pretend to be a Snapchat expert for sure, but with things like Facebook and Instagram, I think they work really well to do polls from your community or for the youth that you're working with. They both have pretty easy features to be able to add those buttons so people can vote on things. Another thing that we've seen be really helpful is some programs are really struggling with attentiveness and attendance in meetings. And so what they'll do is they'll pre-record a video and then post it to things like Facebook for students to see at a later time. So sometimes we've even seen that with exercise classes or things of that nature, where they'll pre-record it. For some of you who are dealing with the vendor policy and CPS and those challenges, you might be pre-recording videos as well. And so some of the benefits of doing that are that students can access them at any time, and you're not necessarily beholden to trying to get all of your students together at one specific time. Outside of those pre-recorded videos, on the other side of the coin is doing lives. And so you can do Facebook Live, or you could do Instagram Live. And so we also seen some programs do their programming that way and not do it through Zoom or something like that, especially if you have older students who are already on Instagram all the time. It can be a lot easier to just go on Instagram Live and do your programming that way. For those of you who aren't familiar with things such as live, the people who are participating and who are viewing can also chat in comments, and you'll see those pop up as you're going. Another super popular resource we've seen within Facebook is private Facebook groups. Those are really great ways to keep engaging throughout the day, even if your program isn't meeting during that time. So maybe there's a challenge that everyone's working on, and people are kind of taking it home and working on it in their own time. If you start a private Facebook group, maybe for your specific program or for a specific age group within a program, students can continue to post back and forth and continue engaging throughout the day. And when you're making it private, you're making it a bit more secure. And then you can also have admin power of making sure you take away any posts that might be inappropriate. Another feature of Facebook that we've seen work really well for younger kids is that Facebook Messenger has an application to use for younger youth. So that way, youth can be on Messenger as long as it's through their parents' account, and they're only communicating with people who are authorized by their parents' friends. So for example, you might have a friend who has little ones at home and their little ones could communicate with you as long as you're friends with their parents, or as long as their children are friends with their parents. The parents of other children can also communicate with you, but you have to have that friendship link between parents first. And so that's just another way with security that we've seen with younger kids being able to participate. And then there's options for there to send videos and to do video calls through an internet access as well. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about helping you choose your platforms. You kind of know the options that are out there. And so once you've chosen your platforms and you're kind of moving into that next step, you want to make sure that the content that you're putting into your online presentations is really engaging. And this makes sure that your audience is kind of staying engaged the whole time as well. So we're going to go through some tools to help you do that. So some ideas of things to put throughout meetings are things like polls. And as we mentioned, that's something you can do with GoTo or with Zoom. Those are embedded into the application. And if you're using something like Google, you might have to use an outside website that you're kind of sharing with your group to do a poll. In things like Zoom, you can also do breakouts where you have smaller sections as well, where you can kind of do smaller groups. And you can also look in your chat box. I know sometimes that's how people sign into a meeting as well. You can share leadership responsibilities. So for example, right now, we have multiple folks on this call. In a minute, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Emma. And so sometimes allowing other people to take on parts of the presentation can really expand who's invested in the presentation too, and make sure that they're really engaged as well. So maybe if you have a class, you can have certain students lead certain sections of it. We also really recommend having targeted questions and asking people to take them off mute to answer. You can also, if you're doing kind of like a classroom setting, you can purposefully take somebody off mute so that way they have to answer as well. And then something else that we've seen be really effective is following along worksheets or sending out materials either electronically or via snail mail ahead of time. And so that's something we've seen a lot of programs take advantage of. We've also seen programs do that for professional development for staff, is to mail out hard copy materials ahead of time. So that way folks don't have to just constantly be going back and forth between different documents as well. And I will turn it over to Emma.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. As Susan mentioned before, our organization collects data on a variety of things in order to support the after-school and expanded learning services and programs in Illinois. However, we also focus on the communication metrics to understand whether our outreach strategies are truly effective at sharing these resources, and we're being truly supportive of out-of-school time providers. Today, I'm excited to walk through how we design our graphics and what are the steps that we take to review our social media analytics. So we're going to jump right in. I will say going forward that I'm going to be switching through our presentation on PowerPoint as well as showing you directly on my screen the different platforms and analytics. So in terms of graphics we use for social media, I primarily use two online platforms. The first one is called Canva and the second one is called Design Bold. So here we go. Oops, excuse me. So this is what Canva looks like when you go to the website. It's just canva.com. It is free and it's an online tool that allows users to create a variety of communication materials, and it hosts a ton of templates. Templates include, as you can see, kind of suggested ideas, Facebook posts, posters, animated social media for Instagram. It could be logos for your organization or program, and then you can also custom design. So in terms of Act Now designs, these are some of the ones that we have been working on. We like to use a lot of colors and easy to read fonts, and we are always trying to keep in mind our mission. Design Bold is similar to Canva in its layout, and it also hosts free templates and stock images. It typically has a lot more stock images than Canva, So those are going to be free. You're able to, this is, excuse me, Pro. For instance, for business presentations, again, these can be different PowerPoints. They can be used for Facebook and Instagram. And they also help you with the different analytics going forward, because you're able to put in key data points and you just have to change the colors or the text. So both of these platforms are great because they're free, they're easy to use to design different projects. You can use them in different formats, so you can download them in various formats and sizes. That's PDF, .png, and .jpeg, as well as others. And they also offer monthly subscriptions, so if you decide you would like to expand the features available, you're able to pay a monthly subscription. However, I personally do not use it for Act Now. I think that the free versions of both platforms have a variety and more than enough templates to play around and create unique graphics. When designing your graphics, it's important to think about 4 key tips to foster more engagement. I've included an example here of our recent summer activity guide that was just released. We want to keep in mind to choose a color scheme. Typically, this goes along with branding of an organization or program. So for Act Now, we use the colors blue and green. We have them throughout the actual graphic, and we like to use them for the backgrounds as well. We also want to remember to use easy-to-read fonts. That's because not all types of social media content or communications materials are going to be one standard size or one standard format. So that could be, again, PDF or a .jpeg. So you want to make sure that your participants and people that you're engaging with are able to read what's actually being shared. We also want to include different elements. So elements are, again, icons, photos, images, or stickers, and these are also available for free on both Canva and Design Bold. Finally, try not to forget to use key phrases for target audiences. Within our after-school and summer learning community or out-of-school time community, OST could be a typical acronym that we use, and we might throw it in to our different communication materials, but keep in mind that that might not be easily understood by different audiences, such as families and youth. Once the social media graphics have been shared out and or posted, it's important to collect information on the ways people are interacting with them in order to understand if the content that you're sharing out is actually garnering the attention that your program wants and may need. So that might be content that has to do with events. Again, that might be meetings. It could also be content that has highlighted program activities.
So I'm just going to jump in quickly here. Can you go back to those other slides? So before we move forward, we're going to do some interaction ourselves. Can you go back just one slide? Thank you. So we've had some other questions come in, and please feel free to keep entering those into the questions box that I just want to touch base on really quickly. So someone mentioned, if you're toggling back and forth between your webinar and a Word doc, taking notes, does it appear like you're not attentive? And so it depends on how long you're gone, but really the attentiveness feature in GoToWebinar is showing a percentage of how long you keep the GoToWebinar window open above all other apps and how much you're using other apps. So yes, technically if you're taking notes somewhere else, that is something else to keep in mind, especially if you're using it with students. With GoToWebinar, someone asked if you could use video. So on the side, there is a video feature as well. I just don't have my camera listed up right now, but that is something that you could do with speakers. For the webinar feature, you can't use the video if you're just a participant. So someone also asked, is your Facebook group connected to your existing account, or is it a separate account? So that is something that's really important to keep in mind for all Facebook pieces. So Facebook does require you to have a personal account if you're ever setting up things like a page or a separate group or things of that nature. That's something that we've actually run into even with Act Now on our own personal page. So in order to start our Act Now page, you have to have your own Facebook profile to do that. And so if you're not comfortable using your personal account for that, we've definitely seen a lot of people create second accounts specifically for those work purposes. So you do have to have it linked to an existing account. So we were able to kind of show some engagement through the questions that we brought in. And now we're going to show you how we do engagement a little bit through polls. So I want to start off by just asking, what platforms are you using for virtual programming? So we're going to share that right now, and we'll give you about 40 seconds to answer that. Give you about 15 more seconds. And if there's other platforms that you're using that we don't have listed here that you're loving, please feel free to also add those into the questions box, and we're happy to share those out. So if you want to respond, you just have to click next to the open dot next to the answer. So I realize I should have put Google on here, and I apologize for that, but it looks like the overwhelming majority of folks are using Zoom for their programming, and that a decent number of you are also using Facebook, and we've also seen some folks enter into the questions box that they're using Google as well. So I'm going to do another quick question to you all, is that are you doing live or pre-recorded events? Give you about 20 more seconds to answer that. Okay, and I will share the results with you all. So it looks like the majority of you are doing your events live. So that's really helpful to know that resources to work for you really need to be good to use in the moment. But that about a quarter of you are doing your events pre-recorded. And so thinking about some of the tools that Emma and I just mentioned, and you can put multiple answers in this poll, how do you engage in presentations? Which of these types of strategies are you using to boost engagement in virtual presentations? Give you about 10 more seconds to answer that one. And again, for this one, you can submit multiple answers. All right, I'm going to close that one and share out the responses. So it looks like one of the most popular tools are videos, followed behind by graphics. And it seems like fewer of you are using breakouts and polls, but those are two strong tools that your colleagues are also using. And then last quick question, and this will be important to think about in our next section, is how is your program attendant? All right, give you about 15 more seconds to answer that one. Okay, going to share that out. So I just want to commend all of you out there who were in that 22%, who were brave enough to admit that you're struggling when it comes to attendance. And I think that when it comes to virtual programming, we know that our students and their families have a lot going on during the day, and there's been a lot happening in our communities. And so it makes sense that sometimes attendance for things at a certain time, especially if you're doing live programming, can be really hard. So thank you for those brave folks who have mentioned that, and that so excited that so many folks are saying that it could be better, because it looks like you're always looking for ways to improve, and we love to see that at Act Now. And if you are one of those people who said great and you want to kind of share why your attendance is so great, please feel free to throw that into the questions box as well. But thank you for sharing that. So as Emma mentioned, we started off by just choosing what platform we wanted to use, and then we talked about what great content we can put into our presentation. And now we're going to shift into, once we've done our presentations, how do we know if we're effective? How do we know if our attendance has been great? And so we're going to start there. Do you want to go to the next slide? So some of the things that we look at for meeting analytics are things like poll answers. So we'll use that a lot. Sometimes we'll ask poll questions that help us to craft future content. So we'll ask about interest or needs or things of that nature. You can also look at how many people responded to your poll. In complete transparency, for the polls that we've done, we've had about 60 to 70% of folks respond to them. So not even quite at 100%. And as you are answering, I'm able to see what percentage of people have answered. And then it also times out how long I've had the poll open. I don't love to leave polls open for longer than 40 seconds because I feel like that kind of takes a while if you're giving folks a full minute. You can also, for your meeting analytics, track attendance, just purely who showed up or not, and maybe always following up with folks to figure out, what's going on, what else happened that they weren't able to attend. Like I mentioned, we also like to do evaluations after trainings, and those aren't just to kind of share, how well we're doing or things we need to work on and get that information. But we also do evaluations and we ask about needs and interests as well, so that we're always really making sure that our content is specifically created for our audience. And as I also mentioned, for GoTo, we love to track attentiveness and just see, was something that we particularly spoke on really boring or, not engaging enough, or maybe we need to kind of jazz something up, and it really helps us reflect on our presentation and our content. Next slide. So another really important piece that you can work on is surveys. So surveys are really helpful before presentations to gauge interests and needs of your audience, and they're also really helpful for after presentation to determine how effective you were and any future needs. I will also say that sometimes with surveys, I'll get a response that's a little bit, it might be different from everyone else's, but it might be a little jarring. Like we did a survey recently and someone responded that they were having a specific trouble with the school district of CPS and being able to present to kids. And I was like, oh, I think I know what they're talking about, and not a lot of other programs are expressing this, but it seems like a pretty serious concern. And so I reached out to that person directly, or sometimes I'll get feedback and I won't quite understand what someone means, and I want to make sure that I fully understand what that need is. And so I'll reach out sometimes to solve individual problems or to get some more information. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Susan. So as I mentioned before, and as Susan has mentioned even before that, we like to use our social media to engage with new members and current stakeholders, as well as help support our after-school and summer learning, expanded learning experiences and programs. So what do we look at when we're thinking about analyzing our social media? First, we're looking at our 3 social media platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter, and website. And I'm going to go through specifically on our website, on our Facebook page, as well as our Twitter page in a moment, what this all means. For Facebook and Twitter, we like to look at posts posts, again, happen over a course of 1 month, over several months, we like to look at things at the end of 1 month, and we like to look at individual posts to understand the reach. So reach is how many people did a specific post actually engage, or how many folks reached this one post and saw it. Impressions are how many engagement actions were accomplished and accompanied by seeing a post. That could be likes, comments, sharing, retweeting, etc. So that means just showing that a person is actually physically engaging with a post. Finally, we want to look at the length of the post. Sometimes our content can be very long, and that typically decreases the likelihood that a person is going to read, or a user is going to read the entire information, all of the information. And so that really is a key thing to think about when we're sharing out resources. Facebook in particular has a mechanism that decreases the likelihood of users to look at different posts if it is over a certain word count, and then it creates a see more drop-down bar. And so try to make sure that posts are within that length, so that you don't have to extend and have users continue to scroll. For Twitter, again,
another note on Facebook really quickly for Facebook images is if the image you've created is mostly text in it, Facebook's algorithm also will put that down at the bottom of the pile. So the Facebook algorithm is what determines what shows up in feeds and things of that nature. And so they definitely, pictures get a higher preference in what shows up. But if your picture has words in it, then it's gonna push it back down to the bottom of the pile. And so that's another thing to keep in mind as important in which of your posts will be showing up on people's feeds.
Thank you, Susan. That reminds me also, it's okay to use Google Images when you're sharing out content. Not everyone has the time in their day, in their busy lives, to create content 24/7. And so a good tip that I've learned through my time at Act Now is actually if you use Google Images and you type in a word, for instance, youth, and then you hit advanced search on the search bar, and I'll go through this in a moment, then you're actually able to go through all the different types of images that have the keyword youth in them, or are of youth, that are commercially usable. You won't have any copyright infringement issues and have been determined safe to use freely. When we're talking about website analytics, we're looking at I jumped ahead. When we're talking about our Twitter analytics, we're looking at, again, the posts over the course of 1 month. We're looking at the reach, the impressions, and also the amount of followers that we have. So does that mean our follower count has gone up? Hopefully so. Does that mean that it's gone down? And then trying to understand why that might be. For our website, we like to look at the number of users. So this is new versus current users. We like to understand what pages are receiving the most interaction. Most recently, that has been for the summer activity guide that Act Now has developed in conjunction with the 50-state after-school network and with leadership from the Georgia statewide after-school network, as well as our after-school during COVID-19 webinar series. So we like to understand what resources our users, our providers looking for. Is it more towards our newsletter? How can we understand their media consumption? Finally, we like to understand time of day with the most engagement. For our Act Now website in particular, that is usually the highest engagement of the day, and of which day, is Tuesday, typically mid-morning to early afternoon, because our weekly newsletter comes out on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. So that's the overview of the slides. I'm going to quickly run through right now what we look at on our Facebook. So as Susan mentioned, when you have a Facebook page which allows admin users to run it, you also get set up with this this toolbox, right, that has different kinds of actions that you may take. So you can manage jobs, you can manage your notifications. And when we're looking at analytics, we want to look at insights. The insights tell you whether by a page summary for the last 28 days, it could be just for one specific day. It's loading. And it shows you all the actions that have been taken, the post reach for one day, or if you want to look at multiple days, you can choose to look at those, as well as followers and engagement. If you want to jump down more than just the overview, you can look through followers. So that will show you over the course of May into June how many followers have started to engage with your content, where it's happening. You can look at the likes, again, the reach, and the page views. Another tool that we like to use is looking at the publishing tools. This is a little bit more digestible and visually interesting to look at the reach and the engagement, as well as the date and time of the post. So you can see that Facebook really helps with understanding, for instance, that 177 people reached this one post, and that there were 5 engagements. So that's really easy to go back to your program or to your teams and help them understand that what their content is doing is actually effectively reaching people. When it comes to Twitter, Twitter also has an analytics platform that is built into your Twitter account. For our Act Now, we like to look at our highlights. So from May 2020, the top tweet was our Afterschool During COVID-19 webinar series. It earned 672 impressions. It was retweeted twice. It was liked twice. You can see more tweet activity. We're also looking at the amount of tweets that we did in a month, the amount of profile visits, how many followers we added, and how many mentions. So mentions could be someone tagging you in another post. So these are important data points because then we can understand, is the content interesting to people? Are people actually using these resources? And are we collaborating with different organizations online to bolster our work that have common missions? Finally, in terms of our Act Now website, we use Google Analytics to understand a little bit more about what's going on the back end. This is happening right now, so in real time. So we have 315 users on the web page. There are 424 sessions. The bounce rate is a certain percentage. Session duration typically is about 2 minutes. This occurs over, again, a given time period. You can change it for 1 month. You can change it in the last 7 days. Again, this is where you can find traffic channel, what types of searches are people looking for. Was it a direct search on the internet, or was it through social media? We can talk about or think about user retention. Are we actually maintaining a base on social media platforms, or are they just one-time visits? Again, here we can find the last 30 days, or you can change it to whatever custom setting you'd like, the users by time of day and date. So that's a little bit on what we use on the back end in order to monitor our social media content and foster engagement and understand why and how people are interacting with our content. I'm going to pass it back to Susan.
Thanks so much, Emma. And just to kind of underscore why we're doing all of this, again, we always say at Act Now that we could create all of the resources and content in the world, but it's not helpful unless we know people are actually using it. And so we really take a lot of this data seriously to heart and look at it really carefully every month. But I think that now that so much of learning has gone online, this is something that you can easily transform into that work. So if you're posting resources to your website, you should go on to Google Analytics, and that's a free service, and you can add that to any website as well. It doesn't have to be a Google site. And you can see our parents and students clicking on the resources that you're putting on there. If you are posting on Facebook and trying to get information out that way, checking to see, what content is doing better than others, so that way you can make all of your content a little bit better. Again, this is something that we're always looking really carefully at. Some things that we've definitely found works for Facebook is that when we have actual pictures that show faces of either our members or staff or things of that nature, we always get more engagement, and things like sharing as well helps to kind of boost that as well. I'm just going to turn to Emma, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. We're going to open it up for any more questions that you might have. We had some really good, helpful tips and things come in. And so as questions are coming in, I'm going to kind of just go through some of the other thoughts that people sent in. So one thing to hear about is that our folks at Shed Aquarium said that their teen programs have actually had higher attendance than ever before during this time. And so they've used their teams to help plan bigger virtual events where they lead components of the event. And that this helps to build investment and buy-in for our team. So thank you so much, Katie, for sharing that. And I definitely agree. When you have other folks taking ownership of some of the presentation, it does help to boost engagement. They shared that they did in April, they did an Earth Day event, and in May was Nature and Art. So it's really great to hear about all of those different resources. Someone mentioned that there have been some issues for those of you who are doing in-person now. You can only limit it to 10 kids, struggling with that engagement because you can only have so many students in front of you. And so one of the things that Andrea, who mentioned that, shared is that they're trying to do something virtual for those kids who can't come to camp in person. So we think that that's a great idea as well for helping to boost that. And I'll hold for a second to see if there's other questions that come in as well. Someone asked, is there anything that you know now about virtual engagement that you wish you had known from the beginning? And I'd definitely be interested to know your thoughts on this. But one of the things that I wish I had known is that it's so within, I think at first I was like, oh, I'm just going to do a presentation and a PowerPoint and that's all there is. And so I wish from the beginning when we had started doing this that we had been collecting all the other information. I would say that we spend more time collecting information almost about content than we do in creating the content. So that looks at gathering interests and needs ahead of time, afterwards, and also analytics as well. And so I think now that I do know that, it's really helpful to know that there needs to be this balance about, it's not just about doing the presentation, creating the content, it's about all of those other pieces too. Emma, is there anything you would add to that? Anything that you wish you had known about virtual engagement before you started?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Susan. I also think that it's almost trial by error in certain cases because it depends on the target audience that you're trying to engage. There are thousands of different resources online that kind of point people and folks in the right direction of how to engage, but I think it depends on really the communities that you're serving. So going forward, it's great to have moments like these where we can share out different experiences and different platforms, and also understand, is this data, are these social media content points actually relevant to the people that we're serving?
I think that's another really good point. I am going to put our emails in the chat box really quickly, just so you have those. And we're happy to answer any other questions now, but please feel free to reach out later if you have any other questions too via our emails. So someone asked about Prezi presentations. So I think that Prezi presentations, and asked if we have any experience with those. I have very little experience with Prezi. I think that Prezi is super cool. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Prezi is, if you've ever seen, this might be dating me a little bit, but Al Gore did his documentary Inconvenient Truth years back, And basically his whole presentation was a Prezi. But it's kind of a more interactive PowerPoint where you can kind of click into different areas and zoom in as well. A lot of those features also cost too. And I'd be interested to know your feedback with it. We don't tend to use it a lot because we're trying to kind of minimize the cost, and we try to do things that are a little bit more simple. But I think that if you have the bandwidth to take on other presentation tools like that, I do think it really helps. I mean, if you were in your student's shoes, you would want something as engaging as possible to watch. So I definitely think that that's a great tool to look into. It's not one that I've used a ton of. And just to kind of highlight again, I did put in a link in the chat box too for this guide that has like kind of 25 different things that you can do on to engage in Zoom, and you can also use these for Google meetings. And so it'll point out not only features but other different types of applications that you can use with Zoom and Google, things like Kahoot, or things to do quizzes, or things to do kind of whiteboard brainstorms and things like that. So things to do brain breaks. And so we hope that that'll be helpful as well. So someone asked about CPDU credits. We are not currently, ActNow is not offering CPDU credits for the webinar. I apologize for that. And someone offered about Prezi, that they used it pre-COVID, and that now it can be embedded into Zoom, and so they're looking to dive more into that. So that's really helpful to know. Thank you.
Looks like there's also a great question about collaborative workspaces like Slack. Are there ways that ActNow is making use of different collaborative workspaces?
So I know of a lot of programs that like Discord, so this one suggested Mural, Slack, and Discord. What we actually use a lot for this space is we use a lot of the Google Suite pieces instead. So instead of using Slack, we have like an online Google Tracker with our ongoing projects, so we communicate through that way. And then a lot of times when we're having specific meetings for our organization, we're pulling up like Google Docs and things like that and doing our notes directly in there. So we tend to kind of use the Google Suite products to do some of those pieces. But I know that lots of organizations, I really think it's about the culture of your organization and what you can get people engaged in. Because again, these tools aren't super useful unless people are actually going to use them. But I do know that I think there's a program downstate that has used Discord a lot with teams and really liked it as well. So that's another one of those that we've used. I'm also just going to share our website that has a lot of resources plugged into it as well for you to be able to get onto that. And if you aren't part of our weekly newsletter, that's free. That comes out every week with resources, and you can sign up for that right in the Join Us button on our website.
This is Kristen Perkins. I just wanted to jump in. Susan and Emma are so humble. And I know that lots of people came to this particular webinar from lots of different directions, but if you have not checked out their website, I would just encourage everyone to go there. They have a whole webinar series that they created about rolling out, in light of COVID-19 and remote engagement. They have a whole webinar series that they developed on the My Shine My Future Partners webinar site. We also recorded with them an interview where Susan walked through their website and pointed out, like, here are resources that we have, here's the webinar series, things that are useful in all kinds of ways. Lots of tips for community-based organizations engaging with communities and families. They have so much there that they've gathered from other places and created their own content. So I wanted to throw in a plug for them since they are humble when they talk about their own resources.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're coming up at about time, but again, I just want to encourage you that if you want to reach out about any of our resources or just to kind of ask or talk through any of the things and the concepts we've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to Emma or myself. We're always happy to hear from folks and get your opinion and to hear from your experiences at Act Now. And I just want to really thank you all again for joining us this morning. I know that there's a lot of competing priorities on everyone's time, and so we're always just so incredibly grateful when you choose to spend some time with us to kind of talk about these things. And really, you're all doing such an amazing job to serve the youth of Illinois and Chicago, and so grateful for your work, and we're here to support you in that work however we can. Thank you to our friends at OSEP and My Shy, My Future for helping us put this together, and we hope that we get to stay in touch with you. Thanks again. Have a great day, everybody.